Hello, how are you, everybody? Um, Welcome to section number 4. And section number 3, we looked at uh, proportions and per capita. For this section, we are going to cover the applications of per capita and proportions. And this session, this video is going to be short. It begins from pages 35 and to pages 40. So this video will cover, actually, I'm going to break this section into two. So this first video will cover from pages 35 to pages 40, and I will do another video to cover the federal budget and the CPI, okay, in the next video. So a quick recap of what we did for section number 3 when we spoke about per capita. We said per capita means what? Per person. All right, so what we do in per capita is that you divide whatever you have, whatever is being discussed, by the population. All right, so per capita means per person. And I gave an example that if I gave your class $1,000 to share, all right, and you want to know how much each person will receive, you are going to divide $1,000 by the number of people in your class. And how much each person receives is what we call it, per capita. Is that okay? Good. Now we dealt with proportions, and in the proportions, I gave you a very simple way to deal with proportions, where I said you need to extract the most relevant information out of the word problem, all right, and then put the numbers side by side, divide, okay, introduce an equal sign to establish a proportion, cross division or cross multiplication, not cross division. I take that back. So cross multiplication and find the value of your x, okay? Sweet. So this is a build up on the skills we learned in the previous section. So right here, we are going to look at some very important stuff that relate to our lives. Now, per capita is used to make astronomically large values involved with the federal budget more meaningful. Now, proportions are used to bring the federal budget to scale with an average American's budget. So we're going to see how these relate to our daily lives, okay? We explore the CPI. Now we've heard about the consumer price index and inflation and all those terminologies. And we are going to see how we can relate these to our lives, all right? How inflation affects our daily lives, okay? We'll make it more meaningful as part of this session, okay? And we are going to see what a budget is. I know we all have a budget. Hey, you have to pay your bills, okay? So you need to get a budget in place. You know that, oh, this amount goes into my rent, this goes into my gas, and this goes into groceries and all that. So we're going to see how we can make a budget. Is that okay? And then we explore parts of a spreadsheet and formulas within a spreadsheet. So we're going to look at how you can use a spreadsheet to come up with your own budget, okay? And then calculate federal budget values per capita, make federal budget values proportional to an average person's budget. Is that okay? And then define CPI and inflation, and understand the numeric relationship among CPIs by month and year. So we will look at, okay, if somebody made, say $1,000 in 1959, if we factor in inflation, how much would that amount be in 2020, all right? So we look at how we can relate these to our daily lives. And this is really a very interesting subject, interesting concept to really understand. So let's see how, let's get into it, okay? Are you ready? Okay, so get your scratch paper and get your textbook beside you. We are on pages 35, okay? And let's go. All right, good, nice. So here, we are looking at proportional expectations. Is that okay? Now, at the latter end of section number 3, I showed you how you can deal with problems like this. And here I'm going to switch between the whiteboard, okay, and the slides, okay? So it says, according to the table, we are looking at the table right ahead of you. Now, Illinois spent $28.54 billion on K-12 education from a population of 12.9 million. Now, with a population of 6.6 million in Indiana, what would be the expected value of K-12 education expenditure if the two states were proportional? So we're going to establish a proportion between Illinois and what? Indiana. Is that okay? Sweet. Now, let me switch to a whiteboard and then I'll come back to this slide. Okay, so let me share a whiteboard right away. And we come back to this, how you can do this easily, just looking at the table. So if you are looking at the table, you could see that we have state, okay? And then on top of that, we have the K-12, okay, expenditure. Okay, now let me use EXP to represent expenditure. And we have the population. I'll use POP to represent the population. Okay, so we are talking about Indiana, okay, and we're talking about the state of Illinois. Okay, so now the question says that Illinois spent 28.54 billion. So this is the expenditure for Illinois, 28.54, and it's a billion. And don't forget that a billion is what? 10 to the 9. So I'll put that in parentheses. Is that okay? And what is the population for Illinois? Okay, what's the population for Illinois? And the population for Illinois is 12.9 million. So we have 12.9, and it's a million, and a million is what? 10 to the 6. So I'll put that in parentheses. Now, the question we have is that it says, according with a population of 6.6 million in Indiana, what would be the expected K-12 expenses for Indiana? So we do not know the K-12 expenditure. We assume that we do not know that. So we put X for the K-12 expenses for Indiana. And then we now bring the population for Indiana, which is 6.6 what? Million. Okay. So we actually just extracting this information out of the table. We haven't done anything new. Is that okay? So based on the question, we assume we do not know the expenditure for Indiana, represented by X. Now let's establish a proportion. So we divide, and then we introduce an equal. So now we have a proportion established, right? So we'll then go ahead and cross product. Is that okay? So this is where what we did under scientific notations will come handy. So you have that, okay, by X is equal to 28.54 times 10 to the 9, and then the population of 6.6 million. Is that okay? Now we want X, so we divide both sides by 12.94 times 10 to the 6, and we divide that, okay? And I'll give you, now if you want to put this in your calc and check the right answer, make sure you introduce parentheses. You put it in your calc just as you see it, okay? And your answer will come out, okay? So that is how you find that, and we're going to use this same approach to deal with all the problems that we're going to encounter under this section, okay? So I'll skip this for a moment, okay? And then go back to my slide, and that will be our result. So I'll go back to my slide, which is that, and we're going to pop that out, and you realize that that is how come we found this result. Is that okay? Good. So basically, that is how you set this up for number 1. And we're going to do same for almost all the problems that we're going to encounter under this section. Okay, so number one, if the amount of K-12 expenses in Illinois were proportional to those in Indiana, what would have been the expected value for Illinois? So here we assume that we do not know the K-12 expenses for Illinois, all right? So that will take the X, we cross product, and this is it. Okay, so this is how we're going to go by it. So you just extract the information out of the table, and that will be your answer for the K-12 expenditure for Illinois. Number two, let's look at it. So we're going to do the setup right there. So we're going to, now here we're comparing Kentucky, okay, and Ohio. So we're going to do same, right? So we are going to assume, it says find the expected value of K-12 expenditure in Kentucky. So we are going to assume that we do not know the K-12 expenditure for Kentucky. And we keep this, that, and that. So really our result, we're just going to have, so we know this is Kentucky, which is under the expenditure, we put X, okay? And then we maintain 4.4 million under the population. And then for Ohio, I'll do OH, we maintain 20.23, okay? And then we also maintain 11.6 million. Now introduce your parentheses, okay? I almost forgot that this is a billion. All right, now establish a proportion, okay? Cross product, and your answer will come out as that. So you realize the setup I just posted looks different, but it will give you the same result as we did in proportions. Okay, so that is how the setup is. You realize 4.4 will multiply 20.3 billion and 11.6 will multiply X, and it's the same scenario with what I just did. Okay, and you find your X, and that is your result. Is that okay? Sweet. So basically, that is how we're going to be dealing with all the problems we're going to see over here. Nice. Okay, let me get rid of that so you can see clearly. So here, we just find a difference, and that is 1.09 billion more than was actually spent in between that period. Okay, so here we talk about GDP, and is the market value of all officially recognized goods and services produced within a country in a year. All right, now we look at GDP per capita. And you know that per capita means what? Per person. Is the market value of all officially recognized goods and services produced within a country per person. Okay, GDP per capita is often considered an indicator of a country's standard of living. All right, so countries are rated based on their GDP. You may have heard that before. All right, so we expect the GDP of every country to be higher. Is that okay? So the higher the GDP, the wealthier the country, right? So it's used to measure the national wealth of a country. Okay, nice. So here we have these countries: Australia, Canada, China, Madagascar, and the United States. Now we are going to find the GDP per capita for each of these countries. So I'll first of all do that of Australia, and we said per capita means per person. So the population goes to the bottom, right? So we're going to do, for Australia, we're going to do 1532, okay, times, and don't forget that this is in billion. And a billion is what? 10 to the 9. Okay, and then you divide by the population of what? 22.0 times, and don't forget this is a million, times 10 to the 6. Is that okay? And you do same for Canada, for China, for Madagascar, and for what? For the United States. And your answer should come up. Now, if you want to use your calc again, don't forget your parentheses, okay? And the answer should come out. Good, okay? So look at this example and use that to find the GDP per capita for the remaining countries. Okay, make sure you are getting these figures right. Okay, make sure you put them in your calc right and expect the right result. Okay, sweet, nice. So now, which country has the highest GDP? Okay, highest GDP, not GDP per capita, highest GDP. Okay, United States has the highest GDP and the lowest is Madagascar. And which country has the highest GDP per capita? And that is Australia, and Madagascar has the lowest, okay? So China is 4 times more than the size of Canada, right? So there are more people in China in which to distribute the GDP. Is that okay? Because there are a lot of people in China. Nice. Now, if China's GDP were proportional to that of Australia, what would China's expected GDP be? Okay, so we're comparing China and Australia. Is that okay? So here, we are going to assume that we do not know the GDP of China. So that will take X. You write a very good X. Write it. Okay, good. So that would take X. So this is it. So let me rewrite it for you to see. So this is Australia, and we have China right there. Okay, so we bring the values, the GDP for China, which is 1532, and don't forget that is a billion. Okay, and the population for Australia is 2 times 10 to the what? To the 6. And China's, so we assume that we do not know that, so that takes X. And China's population is 1350. Okay, we divide, and now we have a proportion established. Okay, so we can cross product and find the value of our X. And that will be the expected GDP for China. And that comes out as that. Okay, so I'm going to rub what I just did. Okay, but this is just to show you how this should be handled. Okay, good. And my answer comes out as that. Okay, now if Madagascar's GDP were proportional to that of the United States, so this time we are looking at Madagascar and what? The United States. So let's look at Madagascar and the United States, these two countries. Now, if Madagascar's GDP were proportional to that of the United States, what would Madagascar's expected GDP be? So we will assume that we do not know that. So Madagascar GDP would take X. So I'll write that as MAD for Madagascar. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say Madagascar means MAD. Okay, and then S, because we do not know the GDP for Madagascar, and the population for Madagascar is 21.9 times 10 to the 6. Okay, and then US, the US is 16,244. Okay, and don't forget that this is a billion. A billion is 10 to the 9. Okay, and then the population for the United States is 314 times 10 to the 6. Now divide into this proportion. Now cross product and find your X. Okay, and that will come out as that. Is that okay? So that is how you go about the applications of proportions. Okay, with GDP. Okay, sweet. Now we talk about a budget. In order to create a household budget, we would need to know our income and expenses. Now, we are going to use Excel to do these calculations, okay? So if you don't have access to Microsoft Office, if you go to modules, all right? If you go to modules in your course, okay, scroll down and you will find how you can install Office for free. Okay, you have access to that for free. I already made a video on that and I shared that earlier for you on the resources you have for this class. Okay, so we know what a budget is and we know income. So income is how much comes to you, right? How much comes to your pocket, and your expenses is what you spend, basically. Now we are going to differentiate between a surplus and a deficit. A surplus savings. So we're going to differentiate. Let me take that again. We're going to differentiate between a surplus and a savings, and then a deficit and a debt. Let's take that. So anytime, assuming so surplus, any extra money at the end of a given period after expenses have been made is a surplus. So if you make $1,000 a month, okay, and then at the end of the month, your expenditure is $800. You have a $200 surplus. So really, what this means is that we're going to do income minus expenses. Is that okay? So if you have income minus your expenses. So if you take any time, you take your expenses from your income, and that gives you a positive value, you have a surplus. Okay? And then anytime you take your expenses from your income and this gives you a negative value, that means you have a deficit. Is that okay? So this equation will represent all. So if you have, anytime you take your expenses from your income and you have a positive, okay, value, you have a surplus, like I just said. So if your income is 1,000 for the month and your expenses is 800, you have a surplus of 200. Now on the other side, if your income is 1,000 and your expenses is 1,200, you have a deficit of $200 at the end of the month. Now, so I've now explained a surplus and a deficit. Now let's look at savings and debt. So an accumulated surplus. So as you accumulate the surplus month on month, okay, you have a savings. And then if you accumulate debt month on month, that becomes what? A debt. Okay. Gucci? Good. Now, here, Excel, this has been explained in your book, right? The processes to do this have already been outlined, so I wouldn't spend much time. Okay, so take your time and go through these one after the other. Okay, so you open Excel and try to explore these processes, and let me know if you have concerns on how to use Excel. All right, good. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, nice. Okay, sweet. All right, so now let me talk about the federal budget. Now, according to the Government Publishing Office, in 2017, the US government had an income of $3.3 trillion and expenses of $3.9 trillion. What do you suspect right away? You suspect that there's a deficit, right? Because expenses have outstripped income. So definitely, it looks like there's going to be a deficit. Okay, so this is the income, and that's the expenses, and that gave us a negative value. So that results in deficit of 6.6 billion. Okay, 660 billion. Okay, sorry, 660 billion. Okay, now if the average citizen with a per capita income of that operated like the US government, what would be the expenses for that citizen? So what are we doing here? So we have to establish a proportion between the citizen, all right, the average citizen, and the government, the federal government. So we're going to do citizen and the Fed. So let me do Fed or federal government, and we're talking about income. Okay, and we're talking about expenses. Okay, all right. So what do we want to find? What would be the expenses for that citizen? So we want to find the expenses for the citizen. So we don't know that, so we say that is X. Okay, now what is the income for the average citizen? That is 46550. Okay, and what is the income for the federal government? What's the income for that? So it's on page 39. You're on page 39, right? So the income for the federal government is 3.32 trillion, right? And a trillion is 10 to the what? To the 12. Don't forget that. And then we have the expenses as 3.98, and that is a trillion as well, 10 to the 12. Okay. Now we have a proportion established by doing that, and we have equal sign. So from here, we cross product and find the value of our X. And that is how this should be done. Okay. So that's how we came by this value. So establish a proportion and get it right. Sweet. Now, assuming that the US population in 2017 was 326 million people, find the per capita deficit. So we found a deficit a while ago, right? Which was 660 billion or 0.66 trillion. Is that okay? And per capita, how do you find per capita? Per capita means per person. So you divide the deficit by the population. Okay? By the population, and that gives you how much per person. Now compare this to the per capita income of the average. Write 2 or 3 meaningful sentences to express your result. And these are the sentences you have to put down to express, okay, this in a meaningful sentence. Okay, sweet. Now, the United States government spent 69.4 billion on higher education in 2017. Is that a lot of money? That is right. To put this in perspective, we want to construct a proportion of education expenses versus income for both government and the average citizen. You remember we looked at some values, so we are going to refer to the values we had for the average citizen on problem number 2, okay? And we establish a proportion between the two, and this is our result. Do you remember this one? Right, so we are referring to the average citizen, the value for the average citizen, okay? And that is on problem number 2 for the same problem. Now, how much money would the US government have to save to be comparable to a savings of 100 to the average citizen with per capita of that? And this is how much that will be. So, and all these we are establishing proportion, just like we've done in all the previous examples. Okay, sweet. So put them side by side, establish your proportion, cross product, and find your results. Okay. So now this is the federal budget, and we want to explore this. So here, if you look at the graph to our left, this is deficit versus surplus. So between the period 1970 to 2015, okay? And look at that. So I told you that anytime you take away your expenses from your income and you have a negative value, that means you have a deficit. So this is a deficit right there, and this is income. So we are going to ask ourselves some questions, okay, using these two graphs, and look at the debt accumulation. So you realize that the US debt keeps rising, okay, between the period, okay. There's debt accumulation. I'm going to see the reason why there's so much debt accumulation. So the only period that some amount of that the US, the federal government had a surplus is between this period, okay? And we're going to see that soon. All right. Now, according to the chart on the left, around what year was there a surplus? And that was in the late 90s, right? And how is your response to question number 1 reflected in the accumulated deficit chart on the right? It slowed down by causing the chart to level up, but never decrease. Now, what has been happening in recent years according to the chart on the left? Increased deficit due to wars and market crash requiring bailout. Okay, so this is practical application of what we're doing, right? We are analyzing the federal data, all right, and making some good inferences right here. And then estimate the accumulated debt. So that it's somewhere there. So that's why we have 18 trillion. Okay, good. So bonus slide, the good old days. All right, nice. So now we are going to be looking at another set of problems, and that will be in the next video, where I'm going to talk about inflation and CPI. All right, and under this, we are equally going to use proportions. Okay, we're going to use proportion. We're going to establish some proportions between CPI. Okay, and the data set we're going to be using for this is right on pages 41. So look out for the next video, and let's have a discussion on the CPI and inflation. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, and good luck.